the flu comes out strong for round 12 and bucks and beats and Rhymes is in a weakened condition. You throw the weak jab, the flu comes over the top, bam! Down goes bucks and beats and Rhymes and he's nearly out, but not quite. He's fucked up bad because the flu is a motherfucker. This shit is boxing me up, dog, this flu. No joke. But we're gonna bore through. Today I'm weighing up old school boxing and modern day boxing. So, where do we start? We start by taking a fantasy matchup with Evander Holyfield versus Jack Johnson. Now, we have to weigh up certain things. How would Johnson fare against Holyfield when he came up from cruiserweight and he bulked up? Remember, he was using all that high-tech gym equipment and he had that guy, I can't remember his name, is a white guy, and he was giving him some crazy training regimes. And he had all the vitamins and all the supplements and such and such. How would Johnson have fared if he had Evander's training regime and his vitamin supply? Some may even say roids. But we can safely assume that Johnson didn't have no performance-enhancing drugs when he was fighting. We can 99.9 say that he didn't have that. And what if Holyfield had to fight Johnson in the early 9th century on Johnson's diet? None of them supplements or vitamins, none of them weight training regimes or any of that. He had to bulk up more or less naturally.
Shut up!
By saying naturally, I'm not implying that Evander ever took roids, but without the supplements or the vitamins or that mad weight training regime he was doing, we have to look at his body type. He has very slim legs. He's not a naturally big man like Ike Ibushi or like Riddick Bowe. And he wouldn't have the luxury of coming up from the cruiserweight division just a few pounds up to go heavy. He'd have to come directly from light heavy, straight to heavy. I'm imagining that Holyfield in the early 19th century facing Johnson comes in at just over 14 stone, as opposed to the 15 or 16 stone heavyweight he is today, or he was in the 90s. As for the fight, I see Johnson smothering and picking off Holyfield's shots, being a bit too clever, not expanding too much energy, and just picking his shots and beating Holyfield on points, because Evander has skills. He has the actual ability to be a good boxer, but he likes getting up in tear-ups, even when he doesn't need to. Watch his fight with Bobby Chiz. Like, Chiz was a hand-picked opponent at heavyweight for Evander because he wasn't a natural heavyweight. He didn't have the punch, he didn't have the skill set, the height, the weight to really do anything to him. But when it seemed obvious that the thing to do is pop his jab out and wait for the aggressive Chiz to make mistakes, which he would, he didn't do that. He just stayed there and slugged with him, and okay, the fight got stopped in the 5th. Chiz accused Holyfield of using something to burn Chiz's eyes. But it's not the fact that Holyfield was in danger of getting stopped by punches, but if you fight that kind of fight against a slugger, you could get cut. Anything could happen, an injury, maybe even a lucky punch, because you're giving him the opportunity. And the bigger point is, Holyfield looked like a bag of shit in that fight. And the blueprint to see where Holyfield would have came up short is when Holyfield fought old Larry Holmes, and you could say Holmes had a more similar style to Johnson than Evander did. And in the fight, Holyfield was expanding his energy. Holmes was picking off his shots, smothering his shots. Holmes was turning to the side, so Evander couldn't have no target to punch at. Holmes sat back on the ropes, knowing full well that Holyfield's momentum of always coming forward would make the counters even more effective than if they stood in the center of the ring together. And Johnson had a very similar skill set to what Larry was displaying. See, Johnson, what you have to remember, I know some of the young cats listening here, he was one of the first cats, him and Sam Langford, to make boxing look fucking easy. They used to make it look easy. You don't really see Holyfield doing that. I see Johnson coming out a winner on points. And for the history books, Holmes didn't win the fight. He won a moral victory of sorts by going the distance and schooling Holyfield. How would Manny Pacquiao, Bernard Hopkins? How would Andre Ward, Sergio Martinez? I mention them because they're often banded about in the top end of the pound-for-pound rankings. How would they cope if they got floored and their opponent didn't have to go to the neutral corner? They were just waiting for them to stand up before they pounded on them again. How would they have coped? I mean, I know most of you have seen the Jack Dempsey, Jess Willard fight. All right? How would most of these modern day fighters cope if they had no video to study their opponents? Because remember, most old school footage we've seen, that wasn't available to the public at large. So how would they have coped? No film. I mean, someone like Julio Cesar Chavez, not junior, but senior, it would have been no problem to him to have no film footage because he'd normally take the first round to read your game and your temperament and everything. And by the second round, he would have normally had you figured out because the first Meldrick Taylor fight apart, where he won controversially in basically the last seconds, he normally dominated his opponents from the start to the finish. Floyd Mayweather would have more than likely have done pretty well in that scenario as well. Apparently he doesn't study tapes. His uncle Roger does, but apparently Floyd doesn't. And if you've heard some of Floyd's interviews, he more or less says that his boxing game is based on a more instinctive, intuitive thought pattern rather than a rehearsed one. And that normally bodes well for this scenario that I've created here. Guys like George Foreman and Tyson, it really wouldn't make much difference to them if they study the tapes or not because they're coming out to kill and destroy regardless anyway. They're not the type of fighters who are going to watch a tape and say, yeah, we're going to take ballet classes like Evander Holyfield did for balance because they saw a video. Them guys ain't going to change their style for nothing. Someone like Barrera, who was a slugger, he modified his style after he got killed by Julio Jones. And he modified it brilliantly. And it helped extend his career from the 90s into the post-millennium. It helped him beat the likes of Nassim Hamed, Eric Morales, or who else? Kevin Kelly, and top-class opposition like that. How much weight is there in the argument today that fighters start to gas out after 8 or 10 rounds and they're only fighting 12? How much weight is in that? Because, okay, some of them old fights used to go 20, 40, 60, 100 rounds. But if you read reports on some of them fights, maybe only 2 or 3 punches will be thrown in some of them rounds. So that comes into play there because 2 or 3 is not breaking or CompuBox records by any stretch. You could argue that the fighters today, they gas out earlier because their whole training camp has been based on a 12-round campaign. And psychologically, their brain starts telling them that the 12-round limit is approaching. You know, the natural reaction to some fighters, if they've got a lead, is they want to protect that lead and they start switching off from engaging in exchanges and stuff like that, holding on. Or if they're behind after 6, 7, or 8, they'll probably start fighting harder than they want to. As opposed if they had a longer fight, they'd have more time to pick their shots stick to their strategy and not exert so much energy because they're behind. And obviously, other things come into play, like your endorphin levels might start dropping from being really hyped up near the start of the fight. The anxiety can bring lactic acid to the muscles, loads of factors. And obviously, if they was training for 20, all the early signs of fatigue would probably start surfacing from the 15th round to the 19th, I guess. Here's the next one I'm going to throw in. Up until 1889, before the Queensberry rules came in effect, it was the London prize fighting rules. And how would your favorite fighters to death cope with that? Because under the London prize fighting rules, you was allowed to do wrestling type maneuvers, holds and throws. Now, obviously, the more physical fighters would have loved that. Two middleweights who challenged Marvin Hagler come to mind who would have done really well in the London prize fighting rules. And that's Mustafa Hamsho and Juan Roldan. They were just some physical fighters, man. Them guys would just wrestle you down and weigh. I saw Roldan fight this guy named James the Heat Kinchin. And yo, he just wore him down, just muscled him round the ring and swell up his head with butts and just hard. That man was tough, man. Tough. Hamshaw was the same. He was really hard, man. He gave Bobby Chiz his first loss. He just roughed up Chiz. You know? Some fighters are just more suited to that style. And the last criteria or category I'm going to deal with is bare knuckle boxing. Because people like Julian Jackson or Sonny Liston wouldn't do very well in bare knuckle boxing. And you're probably thinking, yo, what's the matter with this boxing? Beat some rhymes, dude, man.
Are you out of your fucking mind?
Nah, they wouldn't do well. Because let me tell you this, man, you got bare hands. And you're putting the weight behind the shots like Julian Jackson and Liston. You're going to break your hands, man. You'll break your hands.
Bow to your sensei!
And right now, I'm flashing back to when I was a kid and I was playing outside my friend's house and playing football. And the ball kept going in this guy's garden, a white guy, with a motorbike. He went into it about 2 or 3 times and now he got pissed off. He comes outside and he grabs up my friend whose house we were playing outside and roughs him up. Oh, fucking da-da-da-da-da-da. Some mad right guy who used to ride a motorbike. And my father was really shook up. And he said, nah, man, you can't let that slide. You got to go tell your dad. And he didn't want to tell his dad. He told his dad. His dad was sleeping. You know what I mean? Working man, you know what I mean? And he came outside. What happened? What happened? He rings the guy's door and said, you go grab up my son. And the guy said, no. They started arguing. And this dad was a bear of a man, an absolute bear of a man. No weight training or nothing. Just a naturally powerful man. You know what I mean? And he hit this guy one shot. That's a finish right there. Totally incapacitated, knocked out, starched him out. Police come and rare. And his daddy broke his hand with a punch. And I'm not surprised. Because if you hit someone that hard, unless your bones are made out of lead, you're gonna do damage like punching a wall. You know what I mean? That kind of force. He broke his hand. And I have to think to myself, the white guy wasn't the toughest dude in the world, even though it was an impressive punch. But there's other guys who would have took that punch and it might have hurt them, but they'd get through it and they'd keep scrapping. What would he have done with his broken hand if the guy took the punch and kept scrapping? So what comes into my mind for bare knuckle boxing, you have to look at guys like Hector Camacho, Sweet Pea Whitaker, Willie Pep, them kind of boxers would probably be more effective than Julian Jackson or Liston type hitters, in my opinion. See, because the more purist type boxer has the mindset, he has 12 rounds to dissect you. He doesn't need to swing for the home run every shot. He can stop you by swelling up your face or make the referee stop the bout because you're just taking too many shots. Or maybe they just outpoint you because it doesn't always have to be a concussive one-punch finish. Simple. Don't get it twisted. I mean, people like Foreman, Liston, Jackson, Gerald McClellan, they would have scored brutal KOs, but over a career, surely they'd have to modify their style some. You know what I mean? You couldn't just be throwing them big bombs every fight. Couldn't do it. Couldn't be done. I mean, them bare knuckle fighters used to soak their hands in all types of madness, like salt water, coconut oil, and all types of craziness. And have some tough hand, you know what I mean? I remember our football coach in our local team, Bob. He was a weird man. He was really weird. And if I remember rightly, he broke his hand. He broke it multiple times. Don't ask me how. And he didn't have proper knuckles. It was just all clump and bone mashed up. So he could punch walls hard as anything and not hurt his hand. So I'm assuming them old school bare knuckle fighters that after punching so much with the bare knuckle, like the hands will swell, they'll deform, and your brain tells your body to prepare for what you're going to do. Your brain knows you're a boxer, and it knows you're going to be punching bare knuckles, so it forms thicker bone density to compensate for that. Okay, that's enough amateur medicine. That's just me theorizing as a layperson how that might pan out. Let's move on.
I'll kill a man in a fair fight. Or if I think he's going to start a fair fight.
What about the distractions these fighters have today? Would that be a disadvantage against the old school fighters? I mean, these fighters, they have more TV obligations, computers, and far more gadgets to fuck around with. Probably got their own businesses they're running outside boxing. And I believe the modern day boxer, here's where they would benefit fighting back then. They wouldn't be so focused on their unbeaten record. So they'd be taking more risks because an unbeaten record didn't mean shit back then. They're looking who you fought and when you fought them, what the circumstances were, etc. You know? Not, yeah, I've padded up a record against 16 turkeys and I'm an apprentice champion learning on the job. No, none of that shit there. And it was harder to keep unbeaten records them days. I mean, if you go through BoxRec and you look at fighters in the 40s, 20s, and the start of the 19th century, you see losses, no contest, newspaper declaring verdicts. You see a lot of draws and shit like that. So these Jedi mind trick promoters won't be able to pull that shit off no more. Other factors like a lot of fights that get stopped today would not be getting stopped back then. I mean, Vitaly Klitschko versus Lewis, if that was fought in the early 19th century, what would have happened? Would Vitaly have beat up Lennox and won? Or would his face have got so fucked up that he'd probably get disfigured for life? Because I'm not sure how advanced the plastic surgery game was back then. I mean, I could go on for days, man. I mean, they used to give their fighters alcohol in between rounds in the old school. How would that play out in some of today's fights? But yeah, time to wrap this one up. This is Boxing Beats and Rhymes saying peace out.